Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon and welcome to the Post 114. How to write a theory paper. Now, the request this week does not come from Kevin. Hi, Kevin. But my emailer who requested this particular topic, I'll leave anonymous just in case. But I thought, what a great tandem to work with Kevin's great paper on methods. So I hurried the preparation of this one for you. So you've got 2 weeks, one on how to write a methods paper, and the second one is how to write a theory paper. And our gig this week has 2 parts. Firstly, what I want to try and do is talk about theory, capital T, small t, so that you can survey your thesis, your research projects, ideas that you have, to see if there's a slice of knowledge that you can take away and develop into a theory paper. So that's the first part. What is theory? Have a look at everything you've done, everything you're interested in, to slice some theory away. But the second half, of course, looks at, it's very much a how-to guide, how we are going to build up a theory paper for you in anti-intellectual times. That was an editorial comment. So theory papers are great, but they do emerge through our lives, often accidentally, but there are some challenges emerging in our current age and also in our current doctorates that block, in many ways, the development of great theoretical papers. If you remember, about 25 posts ago, we did a session on Yusuf Wahid, his remarkable infrastructure of care, a great scholar, great professor, great man, changed the world with his ideas. But if you remember, one of his great critiques and worries about doctoral education was that students are no longer doing the deep theory work. In the old days, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, there was often, even in the most empirical, nay, empiricist of theses, there was a theory chapter. Now, there is no doubt, if you read theses that have emerged in the last decade, the theory chapter has started to dissipate, has started to drip away. And that's interesting for many methodological reasons, but we need to log, therefore, that there's sort of less material for postdoctoral students to write and develop that theoretical paper. Now, theory, capital T, small t, has different meanings and definitions depending on the disciplines in which all of us work. But what we're trying to do today is isolate theory, capital T, small t, so that it can become a standalone paper for you and your CV. So let's just start with the basic stuff. So why did you choose this particular theoretical framework for your research? What are the strengths of that theoretical framework? And what are the weaknesses or challenges? What will you not discover? What will you not reveal through your theoretical choices? Okay, so a great theory provides the foundation for the empirical data set that you will discover. It also allows you to build relationships between concepts. This is where we start entering the world of ontology. In all disciplines, theories shape the assumptions that we carry forward in this research project. Put another way, a theory chapter of a thesis or a book is a toolbox, but it offers also profound value as a self-standing provocation to move knowledge forward. And you know, we have all this attention at the moment, and it's all very basic stuff. How to write research questions, how to configure a methodology, how to do a literature review. Colleagues, these are pretty straightforward topics. I know we've investigated them, and they are important, and you need to know how to do them. But they're pretty straightforward. Theory is not straightforward, and that's perhaps one of the reasons in our anti-intellectual times that it's handled so badly in theses and, I would argue, scholarly monographs at the moment. There are certain theories, sadly, that supervisors don't teach to their students but just assume exist. So the students sort of take on a theory like it has an evangelical quality. And I'll do the quick story about this. Some of you may remember I've talked about it in the past. One of the worst PhDs I've ever examined. And there was an oral exam, and it was a terrible thesis. And went into the oral examination, and tried to help the student work out what the hell had gone on here. And the student had said in the introduction that she was deploying a post-structural approach. Okay, so an obvious question was, right, well, thank you very much for logging the post-structural approach. When you say post-structural, which particular theorists have most influenced your perspective? And of course, the student started to cry and said, I hadn't prepared for that question. So think about that. Let's apply that to the work we're doing in the post this week. This student had used the word post-structural. Very precise meanings, but also very diverse meanings, a very broad church, as one would describe in theory. Lots and lots of different moving parts in post-structural theory. And so the supervisors had just said, you're a post-structural theorist. That's what you're doing. You're doing post-structural theory. Now, she wasn't actually, but you notice she hadn't actually read any post-structural theory to be even able to speak one theorist that had influenced her. Okay, so that's an example of bad supervision, because they've gone, oh, this is what you are, and so it's like a branding or a tattoo, poof. And of course, that's not how theory operates. Always remember that there are many theories, many ways of knowing, and it is your responsibility to present your theoretical perspective and the perspectives you did not select and the rationale for that selection. You see, the best of theorists configure a flexibility of the mind rather than digging into a particular perspective. So let's start with some definitions. Okay, so what is theory? Theories are assumptions that align into rational explanations that explain the relationships between concepts or ideas. Theories explain the frame and the shape of ideas that builds into an ontology. Now, theory comes from the Greek theoria, as just about everything we do comes from the Greek theoria. It means spectator, viewing, or beholding. So that's the etymology, very important. So you see, what that's suggesting, what theory suggests, is your approach or your discovery of a fact is dependent on your positioning, your view, and your lens, right? Remember, beholding, viewing, looking, spectatorship. So a theory is an explanation about how objects or experiments or ideas operate. And for academics, theories build into our bodies of knowledge. The word theory certainly varies radically in its application between different disciplines, which adds to the complexity. So the theory that's used in the experimental sciences in particular is an explanation for a patterning or a series of events that aligns with the scientific method. So often though, and it does vary, but theories in the sciences, the hard sciences, they are descriptive. Theory in the humanities is prescriptive. And in the social sciences, as always, Goldilocks' chair, somewhere in the middle of these two extremes. So for the sciences, hypothesis, theory, and law all have very different meanings. But it's also important, and I'm going to stand up for this week. I often try to represent every discipline, but I want to be very clear here and stand up for the humanities and the theoretical social sciences in particular. We have very, very different definitions of theory, and they are often excluded at the moment, and we need to recognise their analytical power. Now, the dispassionate connotations that we attach to theory come, of course, from Pythagoras. Pythagoras argued that theory was uninvolved, dispassionate. But it was Aristotle who really stuffed a lot of our discussions up, if I'm honest, because what Aristotle did was he separated theory from practice. That is a false binary opposition, and a lot of trouble emerges whenever you do the theory-practice binary opposition, because there's no practice that doesn't have a theory of that practice. And of course, thinking is a form of doing because we are practicing ideas. So Aristotle's separation was and is flawed, and he argued that theories don't change things. Practice changes things. Yeah, nah, rubbish. Now, just two examples. I could use hundreds, but two examples. Marxist theory and feminist theory changed the world through both revolution and gradual legislative change to transform, say, for example, the misogyny that existed in law. Bev Skeggs 101. Fantastic. So what is the point of theory, therefore, and why should we write about it? Well, theories are, at their most basic, analytical tools. They help us understand, explore, or explain a subject, and we explain it in a considered, rational, and reasonable way. So at their best, theories have explanatory power. What they do, what they explain, is the relationship between concepts, the relationship between ideas. Theories, therefore, allow us as researchers to isolate a problem and then provide solutions to that problem. There are three types of theory: speculative, descriptive, and constructive. All are different, all are important. Speculative is, as the name suggests, attempting to explain what is going on. Descriptive is the gathering of data to explain what is happening. And constructive is a revisioning of older theories, bringing them into the present to provide explanatory power. Great. Theory is complicated knowledge, it is intricate knowledge, and the best of scholars work with theory. I know it seems like it's not the case in our present, but if you go through the history of ideas, the history of intellectuals, the brightest of humans have worked with theory, because it is the management of big ideas and the relationships between them. So a scholar is a fine theorist because they've got to show a dynamism, a flexibility of the mind. So theories demonstrate the relationship between your current study and the intellectual past that existed, but also your theory can justify the selection of methods. Remember we talked about last week for Kevin's suggestion, too often I said sort of like methods are dialed in. I'm going to do surveys and semi-structured interviews. What alternatives exist? Now, of course, that's because the selection of methods didn't have its theoretical moment first. So if you have your theoretical moment looking at the relationship between ideas, then you select methods and methodologies with much greater care, and you understand the methods that you did not select and why. So whenever you become a bit lost, so what's theory again? It happens to all of us. What's going on here? Just always remember, go back to the why questions. Why questions invariably involve theory. Let's just use some examples. So, why did the concrete crack? Why did the car stop? What started the Second World War? Why did the global financial crisis happen? Why were there so many deaths per capita from COVID-19 in the United States when compared to Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand? Why? And of course, why Donald Trump? They're all theoretical questions. But theory is, and this is important, team, a believable explanation. So if we're asking the question, why Donald Trump? The answer is not God. That is not a believable explanation. So we require, and this is where it gets sort of again going back to Aristotle, to configure a believable theory, it has to be believable by a group of citizens, but particularly a group of scholars. That's what peer review is. And so why Donald Trump? So that requires an understanding of, say, the rural voting patterns in the United States of America, the impact of post-industrialization on the Rust Belt, understanding the relationship between level of formal education and voting patterns, and also understanding the voting patterns of evangelical Christians. if we work through the theories of all of those variables, that can answer why Donald Trump. So theories allow us as researchers to configure a lens on the world and provide arguments that allow other fellow citizens and scholars to share that lens on the world. So we do need to commit to theory. Theory and theorists do matter. And look, since I've returned to Australia, I've committed very deeply to theory, and you've often heard me when I'm in seminars or someone has described me somewhere on social media as, quote, only a theorist. Always makes me laugh, only a theorist. Like I've done media practice work for about 30 years, but I'm only a theorist. But you notice how the word only is deployed in relation to theory. That's significant. Think about climate change deniers at the moment. So they describe climate change as, quote, only a theory. See how theory is demeaned, is marginalised. Now, theories are important because theories allow us to understand the relationship between ideas and the relationship between objects. These are ontological conversations, and you can't have epistemological or methodological conversations unless the ontological stuff is organised first. Theories have power, social power, economic power, political power, intellectual power, and that's the reason why I'm asking us all today, this year, please, let's commit to publishing theoretical papers and also other multimodal dissemination protocols for theory. So what I'm going to do in the second part of this post is help you. So we've got theory. Let's now get you to the point where you know what is required to publish a theoretical paper. Now, theoretical papers are actually our intellectual backbone. We explore and we advance and enlarge our disciplines through theory. Now, in the sciences, theoretical papers are described as fundamental papers. They're a genre of scholarly communication that explores concepts, models, and frameworks. They provide the foundational work for research advancement in the sciences, new ways of thinking. Now, if there is a binary opposition, and as we've talked about, the theory-practice binary opposition is rubbish, then the best of binaries that I'm really comfortable with and is accurate is theoretical research and empirical research. They are binary oppositions. So empirical research relies on data collection derived from multiple methods, and that might be field work, it might be diverse experimentation, you get the drill. Now, theoretical research does not rely on data collection. And this is important because it means you can go big. You can deal with the abstract, deal with the concepts. Nothing is limiting your explanation. So, for example, if you're in areas where empirical research is a big deal, you have to get funding. You have to rely on national governments to have particular priorities so that you can do your research. So I often think about physicists. Physicists are reliant on, at the moment, sadly, defense funding. They might be wanting to do foundational physics research, but it has to have the end user to get the funding to do the empirical work. You see the problem. Now, theorists don't have to rely on national funding bodies. And so therefore, when disciplines change or transform, it is coming through theoretical work. Now, theoretical papers have 5 characteristics. The first is they explore concepts, models, and frameworks and are unafraid of the abstract. Again, don't allow the connotative stuff around, oh, it's abstract. Abstract is good. Abstract is freeing. Abstract is exploration. And what happens through this commitment to the abstract is the boundaries of our disciplines are extended and fields of research develop through theoretical research. 2, theoretical papers do not deploy empirical data. Theoretical papers engage with and extend currently existing literature. They provide strategies, models, scenarios, and thought experiments. 3, theoretical papers probe and question existing theory. Now, I do a lot of this work, and for me, this is the gift of intellectual life. So what we do is we are intellectually generous to the intellectual life of the past, the history of ideas. So we take ideas and theories and tropes from the past, bring them forward, and test them for their resonance in the present. So this is active, this is exciting, this is engaging. So we are valuing the past, valuing the history of ideas, and then through valuing the history of ideas, we push the boundaries of knowledge. So I've often described theorists as we are the Roombas. We are the Roombas of knowledge. We sort of move around the room and we pick up the rubbish, but we then clarify concepts. We locate gaps and problems and we go, there's a gap, and we try to fill that gap. So we challenge the questions that are currently being asked. And when we improve the questions being asked, we enhance the answers that we gain. 4, theoretical papers activate interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, anti-disciplinarity, and of course, post-disciplinarity. Now, I was having a conversation with my great mate, Lauren. Lovely Lauren, you're a superstar. And Lauren and I were talking about what does originality look like? And, particularly post a PhD, because thousands of peer-reviewed papers are being published every single day. So how do you ever know that you're being original? Well, it's a good punt that your chance for originality increases if you're operating at the edge of knowledge, because what you're trying to do is look at those interdisciplinary links or those post-disciplinary links, get to the very edge of where knowledge is and look out and discover something new. So that's why so often these days theoretical papers sit at the edge of knowledge and they build new languages, new relationships, new collaborations. To quote one of the titles of one of my earlier video series, basically theorists are outriders. We go out. We don't know what we're going to find. We go out and like no one's behind us, no one's around us, we just go somewhere. And our goal is to sort of discover what may be there and to then provide a pathway for colleagues that may follow, that may do the empirical work. But we discover something new, discover something interesting, ask an interesting question, and then the colleagues can follow and answer that question. And 5, theoretical papers build the scaffold for future research. Theoretical papers ask the big questions that trigger new research. They also reveal the challenges with previous research, the problems, and how perhaps those problems can be solved. So theoretical papers are big, they're bold, they're gutsy, they've got some grit, they're risk takers. And that means, and becomes important now, theoretical papers often have a very unusual structure. And whenever journals, and there's too many journals these days to be frank, grumble bum, when a journal asks you to write a paper and submit a paper with particular headings, journals are doing this at the moment, so when you submit this paper, please use these headings, right? The moment you see that, know that a theoretical paper can't go into that journal. So please, before you think, oh, I'd love to get a paper into that journal, have a look at the sort of, advice for authors or whatever that section of the journal is. And if they have a list of headings, you know that a theoretical paper can't go there. You see, when we write a theoretical paper, they look different because they are different. They're structured around solving a problem, and therefore the form of the article changes depending on the content that you are exploring. So, for example, exploring the arguments of climate change skeptics, or say the crew that are still talking about autism and vaccines, right? So that theoretical perspective, that must be different from a theorization of, say, the concept of indifference from Alain Badiou, right? So these are all theoretical papers, all of them, but they're written very differently. So therefore, let's talk about and finish off with the key principles about how to write a theoretical paper. So to quote myself, put the problem into the work. Theoretical papers start with a problem to solve. The problem is the grit in the oyster. That's where we start our work. What's the problem? Then the second stage in theoretical papers is to discuss overtly the significance of the research. Why does it matter? Why now? Why is it meaningful? Why are you so interested in it, right? The third characteristic of theoretical papers is, what is your analytical approach? How did you decide to approach this problem? So how did you gather and shape the key literature? How did you decide what is the key literature? How did you decide these particular theorists are not of value to you? So basically you're asking, how did you configure a framework within which your concept or problem can dance? Okay. But the bulk of the theoretical paper, we're getting to the crunchy bit now, the bulk of the theoretical paper must be the innovation. What are you adding to knowledge today? Now, answering this question, what are you adding to knowledge, may deploy arguments from other researchers. You may be enacting scenarios or thought experiments, all great. So the innovation. Then the final component of a theoretical paper, whatever your discipline, is the impact of that innovation. Okay, you've talked about this is what we're doing. Let's explore this. Let's take this for a walk. Exciting, exciting, exciting. That's your innovation. Okay, now explain to me at the end why that innovation matters, what the innovation does. You've made the argument, you've developed the conceptualization, you've developed the framework. What's the impact of that innovation on your discipline? Or if you're building interdisciplinary or post-disciplinary links, how is it, like the outrider, developing new space for intellectual growth? So how is your theoretical insight changing knowledge? Now, as you can see, theoretical papers are exciting. They are the fuel. They are the engine of intellectual innovation. These papers ask the tough questions, and they should be provoking debate. They put a spotlight on an issue that enables the pathway for future scholars. Now, Amber Young et al. Described theoretical papers, and I love this, as activating future-oriented approaches in our universities, in our research life. Theoretical papers, future-oriented approaches. So at their best, theoretical papers allow new audiences to see ideas in new ways. They allow citizens, scholars, to think about ideas that they didn't even know existed. So colleagues, if the world is going to change, then we need to start with a change in our thinking. And that emerges through theoretical research, seeing the world differently and indeed defiantly. So let's all of us make a decision to publish a theoretical paper. I wish you love, light and peace. Tea out.